Edgar Allan Poe is dead. He died in Baltimore the day before yesterday. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it. The poet was well known, personally or by reputation, in all this country. He had readers in England and in several of the states of continental Europe, but he had few or no friends, and the regrets for his death will be suggested principally by the consideration that in him, literary art has lost one of its most brilliant but erratic stars. Greetings, Poe fans, and welcome back to one of our degree episodes, and it's a special. Dun, dun, dun.
Because we're special. Oh, wait.
Cue the villain music. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, that's Jaws.
I know. I couldn't help myself.
Okay.
The shadow
Not
of
villain.
the dark fin behind my head. So, anyway.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, you got the Jaws going on. I got the bird attacking me from overhead, so you know.
Oh, yes. So, at least it's not like pecking down on your head.
Yeah, give it time. It may come after me.
We are going to talk about Poe's greatest nemesis. That it's a feud for the
ages.
Yes, that's a really good way to say it, Jeannie.
Mm-hmm.
And who
because it's still going on even after they're dead, so they may be feuding still in wherever they are.
So who is this notorious villain?
Oh, that would be Rufus Griswold.
Yes, and Rufus Wilmot Griswold. That's his middle name.
See, yeah, okay. I understand why they call that's his middle name, Wilmot.
Yes.
But every time I hear Wilmot, I automatically think of it was either a compromise or a paper or something that had to do with one of the provisos that went with how we got Florida.
Okay. All right. We
I'm
won't
sure.
digress on that, but we can.
Yeah, we're not. So that's why it's like, let's just say Rufus W. Griswold.
All right. I like that.
Okay.
Well, Rufus was born on February 13th, 1815 in Benson, Vermont. I wonder if it was a Friday. That would be
Probably. Hey, I can look that up while you're still talking. I can figure that out.
Yes, and I'll keep
You said it was what?
February 13th, 1815. And he was one of the youngest of 14 children. So it didn't say he was the absolute baby of the family. He was just in the bottom, I guess, four or whatever, the last four. Not a whole lot was said about like how he grew up or anything, but at the age of 15, he basically moved out of his house. Didn't say what he did, but then he must have moved back because then at age 17, he left again. But now we get some specifics. So he went to Syracuse to start a newspaper, which he called the Porcupine. And
of course,
I've been talking that would be a great nickname for him because he is quite prickly.
Yeah, and he has a sharp pen. He could use that quills from a porcupine because he loved to, state very evil. Well, not really evil, but he did not have a shy bone in his body about stating his opinion about things and people, especially.
Yes. So when he started this newspaper, he did not use his name. He did like to use pseudonyms quite a bit. And the pseudonym he used was Toby Trinculo. So thought that was interesting.
Yeah. That's an interesting name.
Yeah. And he basically was, throwing out some things that were not very nice about the local citizenry. So it kind of makes me think, was this paper more of a gossip, kind of, like the Inquirer or something like that? You kind of wonder because if he was doing that to the local people, which I'm sure he didn't know personally, everybody.
Well, you got to think about it too. I mean, in those days, there wasn't as much organization when it comes to who who had newspapers or who had magazines or who was publishing things, because remember, they still were very uneducated for the most part.
Yeah.
Now, in the area that where he was at, in New England,
Yeah.
they were more educated than some of the other areas of the country at the time.
Hmm.
But still, it was very centered on a certain socioeconomic
Right.
section and
Right.
mostly males.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Well, in 1836, he ventured down to New York City from Syracuse,
Mhm.
and he met one of his future wives, Caroline,
Yep.
and they married in 1837. Well, not really sure. It doesn't say, explicitly that she suggested this. He wasn't necessarily a devout, religious person per se, but he became a reverend. And then in doing a little bit further research, it was of the Baptist faith. So he became a Baptist preacher,
Hmm.
licensed and everything. He didn't really utilize that. So it was just very interesting. It's like, did he do it for the title alone?
Probably.
And that's
I
kind of
mean, he probably did it to raise his stature in society.
yes, exactly. And so that he must be a godly man, a good man, because he's a
Hmm.
preacher. Well, we're going to
Yeah.
find out some other things. So, with Caroline, they had three children.
Hmm.
The last child died in like when she had him, she died as well as the child. So the two older
Yeah.
kids were girls. Emily was the oldest. Oh, I just forgot the second one's name. Uh, I'll look it up in a minute because I have some notes about her. Emily
Yeah.
was the oldest, then they had another daughter, and then there was a son that's who died when she died.
Yeah. In the fall of 1842. And
Yes.
then,
Yes. And he was, heartbroken at that point, and he was beside himself. So beside himself. Do we want to add in the creepy factor right now to this
well,
story?
of course.
All right.
Why not? I mean, that's
Oh.
that's what makes the good stuff.
And so
Creepy the better.
when Caroline died in child with having bearing her the last child, he was in Philadelphia. So he couldn't just run to her like he wasn't just across town working, or anything like that. So he got
Hmm.
home as fast as he could, and he was so distraught. You kind of wonder if it was, obviously he really loved her. Was it guilt he wasn't there while she was having the baby, in the in where they lived and all of that? But he would not leave her coffin for 30 hours. And
Yeah.
people kept coming in saying, Rufus, you need to go get some rest. You need to walk away. And in response to this, he took her in her dead body, embraced her, and gave her a kiss on the lips. And just the way it was like written, the research,
Hmm.
it was like her cold lips, like it was very exaggerated. And so I said cold, dead lips when I wrote down my notes. And so,
Well, I mean, it makes sense. But the thing about it is, you know, after, according to whenever it was, he took her in his arms and kissed her and everything,
right.
it would have been the equivalent of kissing a piece of wood.
Yeah.
Because by
Yeah.
that
Right.
time, rigor mortis had completely set in. There would be no
Exactly.
give, there'd be nothing. And it would definitely be cold because there would be no blood flow. But at the
Right.
same time, it wouldn't be completely cold unless the temperature in
Right.
wherever he was at
Yeah.
was cold.
Exactly. Well, 2 days later, on November 11th, so it would have been kind of cold because it would have been winter, and
Hmm.
they had the funeral, And when they put her in a tomb, and so when they were putting her coffin into the tomb, he fell on it and was weeping uncontrollably, and people had to help him, get move away and all of that. And again, he was just extremely distraught. He like couldn't, I guess, think straight. 40 days.
Well, no, I just want to put in that he was still very young because he
True.
was
Very
only
true.
27.
Yeah.
So, and Caroline was probably his first love, and
Yeah,
she
she
was the only
was.
person, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, I
that
get
he
it.
could
I
ever,
totally get
yeah.
it. I totally get it. But just again, this is like a page out of a Poe story.
Hmm.
So 40 days after they put her in the
Hmm.
tomb, he went to the tomb. The sexton allowed him to go in. He took the cover off of the tomb and basically, opened up the coffin, everything, and stayed with her.
Hmm.
And so that was very bizarre.
No, and smelly.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
maybe not as much considering it'd be outside, but yeah, decomp had to been setting in that with the colder
exactly.
temperature, it's probably slowed it down to enough he could survive it. But at the same time, yeah, that's a little mental.
Yeah,
But
again, it's a page out of a Poe story.
yeah, and it'd be um, you know, it just shows that many people grieve in different ways, and that might have been his way
Absolutely.
of grieving.
Yes,
So,
yes. So basically, so once that happened, he basically couldn't be without someone. And
mhm,
so he met a lady named Charlotte Myers,
mhm,
and she was a little bit older than him. She was 55 and he was 29.
yeah.
And
Well,
yeah. So they were married on August 20th, 1845. And so he had the two daughters, which, she helped raise and everything. He tired of the marriage pretty quickly, and he wanted to divorce her because he had found someone else at this point. But she was like, nope, we're not getting a divorce. And so he basically left her and left the youngest Caroline. So yes, the child was named after the mother.
mhm.
Caroline was with her, and Emily, who was 8 at the time, went with to live with a relative in New York. And so Elizabeth Elliot had proposed a book to him called The Revolutionary Women, um, basically revolutionary women, and wanted Griswold's access to his own library because he had a lot of things, because there was another controversy that I'm going to talk about in a second that he was involved in over something from the Revolutionary War times. And so
Hmm.
he was like, sure, that's fine. You can use my library and do your research and everything.
Now,
Well,
who was this again?
the Elizabeth Elliot, so writer
And who was she?
and
Just a
author,
writer,
an
just
author.
an author. Okay. I didn't know if she was working for a newspaper or if she was working for somebody else or
Yeah, this was just her writing a book.
okay.
Okay. And so he gave her access. She wrote her book, she published it, and she didn't acknowledge him in the book to say, thank you, Mr. Griswold, for allowing me to use your library. So,
Sounds about right.
yes, so Rufus was very upset, and he avenged himself by basically saying something not very nice about her in his anthology, in an anthology in Female Poets of America. And
Sounds about right.
so, yeah. And so in 1852, when he was trying to get the divorce, Elizabeth Elliot tried to talk to the new lady. Her last name was McCrillis, And
Harriet was her first name.
what was her first?
Harriet.
Yes, Harriet.
Harriet.
She
Harriet
tried to
McCrillis.
intervene, saying, "Don't marry him, don't marry him." And so, of course, so there was the little feud there. Okay. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, Myers refused. And so, but going back to the fall of 1847 with the tie-in here of, that was one controversy with Elizabeth Elliot where he got mad and did something revengeful, avengeful, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
He was also involved in 1847 with a controversy over a book about George Washington against a man named Reverend Joel T. Headley, who was also writing a book about George Washington. That the titles were very similar, and so that took place. And so he was very ugly about that to Mr. Headley. So Myers finally agreed to a divorce if she could have full custody of the younger daughter, Caroline. And so he granted it, and he never saw either one of them again. Just from what I could tell, it doesn't appear that maybe he even saw Elizabeth, the other daughter, or Emily, I'm sorry, Emily, the other daughter,
Mm-hmm.
either with the relative in New York. And so he did marry Harriet McCrillis on December 26, 1852. So,
Kind of makes sense with as much. Uh, he probably married the older woman because he was looking for a mother figure for his daughters because
yeah.
he was still grieving the loss of Caroline, and that explains why he would just not hang on to his children because he
Hmm.
lost his son, and then he did not want his children after the mother died. So
Yeah. And
he was just an all around pain. Sounds like it
oh yeah.
from the get go.
So I think there was at one point then the marriage to Harriet was falling apart, and Emily may have come to live with back with them since Harriet was in the picture, because there was another article I found that Harriet was trying to get away and there was an accident. It was a crash. I'm trying to remember if it was a train. I can't remember, but and I should have written it down. But Emily was hurt pretty badly and they had to revive her. She was basically dead and they revived her back to life.
Well, that's an interesting point in itself because in
Yes.
those days they didn't even know what CPR was, much
No,
less how to do it. So,
exactly. So, yeah, so he had a lot of tragedy on his own in his life. I think some of it was kind of self-inflicted based on how he treated people. But basically all the other parts of my research really focuses on the feud with Poe.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, he was one of 14 children and he left home when he was 15,
Hmm.
which in that day and time was not unusual.
No. Mm-mm.
But he definitely chose, in my opinion, he chose some rather uh, out of the box ways of, you know, thinking and living. And, especially if he became a pastor or reverend or however you want to call it,
Yeah.
that's just unusual because why? Other than, like I
Exactly.
said, to,
Raise his
increase his own
status.
status.
Yeah, I think you're
So,
right on that, because he just, with him being a literary figure, he did his own writing, he was an editor,
hmm
and and it's very innovative at the age of 17 starting your own newspaper. I mean, that's incredible that he did that. And
yeah.
just when you think about it, it's like it's just the whole thing is it's a soap opera.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, a lot of people, he wasn't alone. He didn't do
Right.
everything by himself, so he was not alone in that. Kind
Hmm.
of like whenever he started the Tattler, which in itself, it's like when I think of that, I'm thinking, what are you, like a middle schooler? But I mean, he was only 17, so he was kind
he
so
he
he was kind of the equivalent of a middle
yeah.
schooler by calling it the Tattler. Anyway, so he actually had co-edited with Park Benjamin
Yes.
called The Tattler. That's when he kind of first ridiculed Poe, is
Yes.
where I was going with this,
Okay.
to talk about how he was, he was smart in his own right. He was a writer, but he, like anybody else, can make mistakes. And anything you can write in the newspaper or anywhere else, there can be mistakes, and you need to check your information.
Yes.
Because he wrote Edgar A. Poe, Esquire, editor of the Baltimore Chronicle, and Branson Mayer, Esquire, of the same city, have been for several days exhibiting premonitory symptoms of bloodletting. The friends of the parties have brought about a settlement, however, and both gentlemen have concluded to live as long as the Lord will let them. Okay.
Yes.
He put this in writing for other people to read.
Right.
The biggest problem with that was that that was not Edgar Allan Poe. He should
Right.
have put Nielsen
Nielsen.
Poe.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Now, he went back and corrected it, but as we all know,
It's
even if you
already.
redact it,
Mm-hmm.
you put it out there.
Exactly.
So
Just like in a trial when the judge says,
the
stricken
jury
the record, the jury's heard it.
disregard what was just said.
Yep.
No, once it's in there,
It's in there.
yep. So
Oh,
that was his
no.
first official attack on Poe, even
Yes,
though it was a complete mistake.
absolutely. But yeah,
And I
it
think
was
that's where the feud kind of started.
began. I think so too. And then when he was working on his anthology of American poets, Poe was the
Hmm.
editor of the Ladies and Gentlemen's magazine in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
He met with Griswold and basically they discussed literature. Everything was, I think, pretty kosher. They seemed to get along. And then Poe sent him several poems and a
Yeah.
memoir. And then on April 18th, 1842, to me, I wrote this down as strike one. This
Yep.
is where it really hits the fan. The Poets and Poetry of America was published with only three of Poe's poems, and Poe was not happy.
Yeah. And he was extremely not happy with the comments that were describing
Yes,
them as lukewarm praise of his poetry,
yes,
and, and an inaccurate memorandum.
yeah, that
So
was
it probably didn't help that he only published, even though he did publish three of Poe's works. It was kind of like, yeah, I'm just doing this because I'm gonna, not because I actually like it.
right. Exactly. And then Poe then resigned his position at Graham's, and then Griswold took his place, making a whole lot more money a year. Griswold was paid $800 a year. And it's like,
Mhm.
why is he getting all this much more money than Poe? And so that made Poe mad.
Well, that would me too.
Yeah,
I would be ticked off because not only, have I worked here, but then I leave and now you hire this guy and then you're paying him $800 a year and you were paying me chicken feed. I don't think so.
exactly. And so in June of 1842, Poe basically wrote about Griswold's anthology. And to me, he wasn't like ugly, ugly about it. He was professional, but got his point across.
Yeah. I just, I mean, I can understand having a little, what's the word? Resentment, I
Yes.
guess,
Yeah, that's a good
towards
word.
someone. But I think the resentment would be more warranted if Griswold had come in and taken the job from Poe before Poe had actually left,
Yeah.
you know. So, but Poe had left like a
Signed
month
on his
earlier.
own. Right, right.
Yeah, he left on his own.
Hmm.
And then, Griswold came in, they gave him more money. So I can understand the resentment from that. But at the same time, it's like, dude, you stepped away.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but, and Griswold, I have to say it, in order for him to be as popular and be able to do as much stuff and to do as much as he was doing, he
Hmm.
had to be kind of more personable, able to, grease the palms and have a good way with speaking.
Hmm.
What do they used to call them? The silver tongued devils type of thing.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's what I
Very.
think of with Griswold. So I mean, that
Right.
makes sense of why he got more money because poor Poe, I don't think he had that.
Poe was charismatic and he knew how to talk to people, but at the same
Mhm.
time, yeah, I think Griswold may have had more of, I think the silver tongued devil is a very good term for him, Jeannie.
Yeah. I mean, and think about it. He took over at the Graham, right? Graham,
France.
right?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, make sure I had the right G.
yeah,
Uh, when he was 27, so this was like before Charlotte died.
yeah, yeah,
So he was, he was married, he had two kids, he was expecting a third. So he was like the epitome of a well put together man.
yeah. Oh,
Where if you think about it with Poe, Poe had been what? I mean, he was married to Virginia
mm-hmm.
at this time because they got married in 1836, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Yes, we
And
did.
then and so this was like towards the end of Virginia's life type of thing because this is like when she, right before she was starting to die, right? Because it
Right.
was 1840.
7. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
she became ill in 42 and then died in 47.
yeah. So this was right when she was starting to get sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Poe may have left the Graham
Yes.
magazine because
Well,
this was around that time
because yeah, they moved to New York.
or for
No,
her health.
right, exactly.
So that might, and you got to think about it, what Poe might have been going through because, Virginia was getting sick. He
And the
had to leave
stress. Yeah.
Graham. Yeah, and the stress. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I
I mean,
agree.
there was probably a lot of tragedy and, self self-hatred Poe was going through at the time and he
Right.
was transferring it on to Griswold. I'm
Yeah.
not excusing Griswold or anything. I'm just
Mhm.
saying that Poe had every right to believe what he did and think the way he did about his own work and stuff. And yeah, he and Griswold probably did not get along at all. But I have to say, maybe he had a little bit of resentment toward Griswold because of all the good that he had going on in his life when Pose was about to,
Right.
break down. And of course, this
Yeah.
was kind of before Griswold's imploded. So,
Right. Well, and this was in the, right before, the time that he was in Philadelphia is probably some of the best work that Poe put out. And so
mhm.
like that was his golden age. And so this was right at the end of the golden age of his writing. Not saying that he didn't write, because he wrote some of the best works he did at the end of his life. But so right after Poe circulated about Griswold's anthology, he did get a paid review because Griswold paid him to write a review, and
Mhm.
it was not harsh, but he objected
Yeah.
to around 2 dozen of the authors that were in it. He did not care for their writing. And
And that was, he wanted a review, and the review doesn't, even though he was being paid, didn't say that he had to be all happy and,
right.
sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah. And so after that, basically by the end of that month, they were on good terms. They,
Mhm.
respected each other, it seemed, and, appreciated each other's work and could talk to each other and be in the same room with each other.
Yeah, and it says that by the end of June of 1842, they were back on friendly terms.
Hmm.
And then, according to some writings that they have uncovered,
Yeah.
that Poe actually wrote to Griswold asking him to send him $5. He goes, "I am sick and Virginia is almost gone.
Yeah.
Come and see me." Peterson says, "You suspect me of a curious anonymous letter," which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
"I did not write it, but bring it along with you when you make the visit you promised to Mrs. Clem. I will try to fix that matter soon. Could you do anything with my note?" So
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting in itself that, an anonymous letter, more mystery yet
Yes.
again.
Exactly. And before that happened, Poe invited Griswold to his home in
Hmm.
1843, and they had a really good visit. And
Hmm.
but then in the fall of 1843, in his lecture, he scorned Griswold again, and that's when Griswold resigned from Graham's, and that was in October of 1843. And so they basically had a roller coaster friendship, hateship, however you want to call it, the entire
Well, and you have to
time.
understand that the year after this, in 1843, is the year after Charlotte had died
Mm-hmm.
in childbirth.
Right.
And so Griswold is having to deal with his own grief.
Right.
And who better, once more, there was probably some transference, who better to take it out on
Oh
than
yeah.
Poe?
Let's project on Poe.
Hmm.
I that
Yeah.
the everything I read about this, I was like, projection.
Yeah. I mean, and it just makes sense that you have these two writers. They both have their own type of influence in one way or the other.
Yeah.
Griswold's, I will have to say, was more of a positive of influence that he was not using. How can I say it? He was ingratiated into a community already.
Yeah.
He probably, with the religious aspect to it,
Right.
with him being married, he was probably, with Charlotte's family, may have been involved to it. He had done well with his, papers, even when he was like 17. He
Yeah.
had started making a name for himself. Whereas Poe, he had time after time had started on this track to become something,
Right.
but there was always some obstacle that took his knees out from underneath him and he had to kind of start all over again.
Yes. Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's, in essence, you were looking at two sides of one coin,
Yep.
and they like flipped every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Poe was having good, good diet, good days, good, I know, writing, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Griswold's life was imploding,
Yeah.
and then vice versa.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things to where you really want to dislike Griswold, but at the same time, you can't really completely hate him because he was, living his best life the best way he could.
Right.
And sometimes that meant attacking Poe, but
Yeah.
or Poe's writing or using people. But at the same time, it's like you can't really judge somebody unless you actually were there. Because remember, we're only getting all this in secondhand information. There's
Right.
very few first person
Yeah,
accounts.
a lot of it is the letters that were written and account
Yeah.
people talking about it. Yeah.
And even if you have to look at letters, sometimes those letters, like we just said,
Hmm.
anonymous letter, because Griswold was accusing Poe apparently of writing an anonymous letter. So we're like, there's yet more mystery. So not everything is completely answered.
Oh, yeah,
So you're left once more with going, okay, whatever.
exactly. And are there letters that were destroyed that no one will ever see, will ever know what was in them? You know,
I'd say yes.
did
I
Poe
mean,
talk to Virginia and Muddy? Did Griswold talk to whichever wife he was with? It's like, what are those missing pieces?
yeah. And once more, it's like everything else. We may never know the full story, unless somebody can figure out a way to transverse to
Oh,
the plane where they're at and interview them.
yes,
You know.
exactly. Well, and like what you mentioned about Griswold giving Poe money to help the Broadway Journal stay
Mhm.
afloat while he was running it. Poe, in turn, or no, I'm sorry, Griswold wrote a positive thing
Yes.
about Poe in the Prose Writers of America, which was, nice.
Hmm.
And then it kind of looked like for the last couple years of Poe's life that they really didn't interact a whole lot. It was like it stopped around 1845 and then jumped
Hmm.
to Griswold finding out about Poe's death and then hooking his claws in.
Yeah, and kind of makes sense because if you think about it, those last few years of Poe's life were kind of the worst, even though he was trying to hang on and probably did some of his
Mhm.
deepest writings,
Yeah,
and even those that were uh, published posthumously
right.
kind of shows what he was dealing with. It, I guess they just kind of, Griswold was in another world. I mean, he had found his second wind, as the old saying goes,
Hmm.
because he had finally gotten rid of, what was her name? Charlotte.
It was
Was it
Caroline,
Charlotte?
Charlotte, and
Charlotte, and then he was now married to Harriet,
yes,
right? Or
yes,
he
that's
was getting
correct.
ready to
Yes.
marry Harriet.
Yeah. Yeah. They got married in 1852.
Yeah, and this was right before Poe's death, so he wasn't married to Harriet yet, but
Correct.
he was in that transition of finding a new life kind of thing.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
And, Griswold was about to publish yet another book, The Prose Writers of America.
Mhm.
And he was, exhibiting his well-mannered feelings and only positive things to say about Poe at this point. So, like you said, it was probably like one of those things of, I am now, you know, I respect that had a friendship with Poe, but at the same time, every good thing must come to an end.
Yeah.
They were not seeing eye to eye or in the same circles anymore, in my opinion.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, when Griswold heard about Poe's death, he
Hmm.
immediately wrote the obituary for the Tribune and he used another pseudonym, Ludwig. And Horace Greeley, who was another editor there,
Hmm.
if he had known what that obituary would have done and hurt Poe, he basically said he would never have let that run. And so it was like, it was almost like nobody else proofread it to make sure the content was accurate. They just trusted Griswold to do it. And then I thought it was very interesting. Let me find my note about this. So, in a letter, I believe it was a letter to Sarah Helen Whitman, Griswold basically said that he wrote the letter or wrote the obituary in haste. And that's
Hmm.
why it wasn't as accurate as it should have been. And I think that was just
Right.
him, you know,
Hmm. Trying to
making
cover his ass. Let's
excuses.
just say it. He
Yes.
was just trying to cover his ass.
Because he also said he didn't really see Poe a whole lot in those last few years. And so he just, and I'm like, oh, don't do that.
Hmm.
Don't
Yeah.
try to excuse your way out of this. You knew it was wrong.
Yeah. And as well as everybody else that he was getting backlash and he was trying to say that it was not intended as it was taken. I wrote it in haste and so I may have misrepresented and he was probably using his con man
Oh, yeah.
virtual,
Yes. The
ways to try
silver
to
tongued
cover his
devil.
own. Yeah.
The silver tongued devil
The
porcupine.
silver-tongued devil was out and about once again. So,
Oh,
and I hate to say it, but it may have been just Griswold's way of actually truly letting out his true feelings for Poe
Mm-hmm.
now that Poe was gone.
Well, and just from some other of the things that I read, it was like, Griswold took it upon himself because Poe, even though there is one thing I found is that there's not 100% evidence of Poe doing this, that Poe named him as his literary executor, not his like executor of his his estate, which was really
If he,
thing,
yeah, didn't have anything.
but his literary executor. And so Griswold felt it was his role to do this obituary and to write a memoir, and a biography about Poe. And what I found is that he really respected the genius of Poe, that he was an intelligent man, right, brilliant writer, and not that Griswold liked everything he wrote, but he felt that he had scorned him and he could not forgive him even after the man died. And I just think that's horrible, to defame someone after they're dead because they don't have the opportunity to defend themselves.
Very true.
I think that's
And
so horrible.
well, and I hate to say the irony of it, but Griswold himself ended up dying from tuberculosis,
I know,
which was very common in those days. But
but very ironic, based on
yes,
all of the people that Poe was close to and how they died.
yes. And Griswold was one of those that had the special talent of backhanded comments.
Yeah, yeah.
He was very good at saying things about someone to a certain degree, but at the same time turning it back around to, kind of slap him in the face with a comment of saying, he was okay. He
Hmm.
did write pretty good, but for what he was, kind
Right.
of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, you did it, but you kind of ruined his life after the fact.
Yes. Well, in some ways it's very, I think, kind of like you were using the analogy or the, metaphor of the two-sided coin. It was like, yes, he basically lied about much of what Poe was about, who he was, how he acted, his personality, and everything. But then that also helped, create people's interest in him, because was he really this doomed figure, this brooding figure that's drinking and taking drugs, and that's how he's writing all this stuff? And so, in a way, if we had had the real obituary, the real biography by, like, if Griswold had written the truth, would Edgar have had the fame he does now? You kind of wonder.
Well, and
Playing devil's advocate here.
you also have to wonder, did Griswold write that not to kind of deface Poe's own personality and his own, fame or infamy or whatever,
Yeah,
but to get himself back into the limelight to bring on the, I am the number one,
yeah,
I am better, I can do this, I can do that. He would have been nothing. I'm doing him a favor,
yeah. I think there was
because
a little bit of that too. Yeah. One of the other things that I thought was even more just like stick it, is because, and it still goes on today, in one part of the obituary, he misspelled Allen and put an E. And I'm like, dude, you knew the man.
that's true. But you have to wonder if it was actually him or if it was the one that printed it
True.
that
Very
did
true.
that.
Yeah. It's
Because the E's and the L's and the S's and the T's on a printer back in those days were very very similar in a lot of things.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
A's, E's, I's, O's, U's, they kind of had to represent different ones. It's like,
Right.
trying to distinguish an F from an S.
Yeah. Oh, I
So
know.
it could have just been an actual mistake, but at the same time,
It's still just, yeah.
it's just one of those. Did he do it on purpose? Was it an accident? Was it just,
Hmm.
it seemed par for the course for Griswold.
Yeah, it did. But then 6 days after Poe died, Mariah Clem Muddy asked him to put together a collection of Poe's works. And he
Yes.
did and ended up doing four different volumes editions of it. And I think the worst part of that is that no money went to her.
Yeah, which is another irony in itself, to why Griswold's taking all of the fame of Poe and reaping the rewards.
Yeah, exactly. And um say trying to look at anything else that
Oh, and there also was the thing that they made speculation that certain Poe letters that showed up were not Poe letters, that
yes,
they were forged and written by Griswold after Poe's death,
exactly.
because he was notorious for forging letters.
Yes,
So it's one of those things where what's true, what's not, you may never know. And some of the things uh, Griswold probably wrote just to, and I mean, especially if they turned up after Poe's death, Griswold probably was doing it to try to help sell things so he could make money off of Poe's death.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because the first volumes came out January 10th, 1850. There was no mention of a second volume, but obviously there was because the third volume
Mhm.
came out in September of 1850. So somewhere between January and September, a second volume came out. He made plans for a fourth volume to be published in 1856. And then Charles Godfrey Leland, who was a close friend of Griswold, threw out Griswold's information about discrediting Poe and
Mhm.
basically scolded Griswold like a child on it. And I was like, good for him.
Yeah, about time somebody did, but they waited a little too late, in my opinion.
Oh
But
yeah. But I think by then, I think the honeymoon was over, the honey death was over, and
mhm.
Griswold started losing interest in Poe, probably because he made the money he could make.
Yeah, he was losing momentum because a lot of people were starting to doubt Griswold and his and things that he had written, and other things were showing up. And we have to actually understand that when he was going to volume 4, wasn't that long before he died, so he probably was feeling the effects of tuberculosis and having to fight that battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's see. And then Griswold basically continued to work on the anthologies that he put together
Mhm.
until his death. And that was August 27th, 1857. And like
Mhm.
you had mentioned, from tuberculosis,
Yep.
which I kind of, it's like all of the people that affected Poe greatly, that's what they, for the most part, died from.
Yep. And just the sheer irony of it. And
Hmm.
but it's not true irony, because during that day and time it was very much on the high end list, between right there with typhoid, cholera, dysentery, all the big
Yeah.
ones,
Yeah.
because the hygiene levels of those times were not there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
It's just, yeah.
but it is what it is. So,
And there are some other people in Poe's life that would be smaller nemesis to Poe. So this may be a topic we go back to: Poe's enemies, frenemies, nemesis.
of course, because there has to be more than just Griswold.
Oh yeah, there is, but they're not as he is the
Prominent.
yes, he is the antagonist in Poe's life.
Oh yeah, he is the antithesis of Poe.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's just, they were, as I stated earlier, it's like they were two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like having the little devil on one side and the angel on the other of your
Yeah.
shoulders, and they both had the equivalence of being either the devil or the angel,
Yeah.
depending the circumstances. So,
Hmm. Yes, and
and
it's
Griswold got the demon in the end.
yeah.
Griswold was the devil in the end.
Yes.
Hate to say
Oh,
it, but he was.
I know. And the quote that you're going to read, I think when after I read the note about it, comparing it to two people in a Shakespeare play, it
Mhm.
it really like hit home to me that that whoever put that together was kind of spot
Makes
on.
sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the equivalent of the protagonist and antagonist of every story in history, in my opinion,
Oh yeah. I
all the
mean,
way back to Gilgamesh.
yeah, I mean Griswold started it with a line from Macbeth, and that's that. I'm not going to give the line away because Jeannie's going to read it in a minute. But thinking about the two prominent characters in Macbeth, and mine and Jeannie's favorite Shakespeare play is Macbeth. And so we were like, oh, wow.
And the most cursed of Shakespeare's plays,
Yes,
which
exactly.
makes it even more.
Yes. Let's just like all
Yeah,
the irony.
yeah, yeah. Just keep hammering it down, hammering it down.
Exactly. So, well, I think we've kind of, I think, animated out.
Yeah, I think we've really went over and discussed as much as we could with what we had for the battle between Griswold and Pope.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and on that note, we
We
are
are
Poe
out.
out. We have not learned of the circumstance of his death. It was sudden, and from the fact that it occurred in Baltimore, it is to be presumed that he was on his return to New York. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well.